Me again, and me talking about ethics again. Yay, exciting. I hope you all watched a good amount of Corey talking about counselor and counselors and what we do. It's a long video, I understand that. I would probably just read a lot of the transcript myself. So, but I did want to just go ahead and provide him talking about himself and what his opinion is about a counselor and the profession, and how that applies to the use of theory. So what better way to have a lecture than by the guy that wrote the book on the chapter that we were focusing on. So, and hopefully the link worked for everybody. But I'm going to provide a little short overview of ethics and how it applies to what we're learning in Theory and Techniques 2 and why it's so important. Now, this is, how many times have I talked to you guys about ethics? I do wrap it into every single one of my courses because it's important. Because if one day I'm sitting on an ethical review board in West Virginia, I don't want to see anybody's names come up. I don't want to read about you in ACA or in a newspaper. I definitely don't want that. So, and I like ethics in general. I like the concepts of ethics, and I like how there's not always an answer, a single easy answer to ethical dilemmas, weird as that may be. But so thinking about types of ethics and looking at mandatory ethics, bare minimum here with the mandatory ethics. This is looking at our ethical codes, our codes of ethics. Typically, as rehab counselors and or mental health counselors, we're going to be looking at, generally speaking, two codes of ethics, the CRCC Code of Ethics and the ACA Code of Ethics. However, depending on the state that you're working in, states follow typically the ACA Code of Ethics or even APA. So you might want to look into what your state requires or what your state ethical board looks at or goes to for guidance in terms of their ethical code. The mandatory ethics is the bare minimum. Aspirational ethics, it's the highest standards of thinking and conduct. And the positive ethics, I would say this is probably where the majority of us fall, right? We're not doing just the bare minimum. We are really hoping that the work we're doing is in the best interest of our clients. We're not just trying to stay out of trouble or trying to stay out of litigation. We are doing what we can for our clients, but we're not trying to aspire to be the most ethical counselor in the world. Ethical decision-making is a process. So we have our codes of ethics that are founded in certain principles, and there are decision-making models. So again, it's not that it's just always going to be a blatant ethical violation in front of you, that you know what the answer is automatically. You don't need to turn to anybody else. You don't need to do any kind of consultation. You don't need to talk to me or a supervisor or whoever you might be working with, if it's practicum, internship, or beyond. But there's a decision-making process that you should be going through when you're faced with an ethical dilemma. You're looking at a potential problem and determining, first and foremost, is this really an ethical dilemma? Is this a problem that I should be focused on? Then you're reviewing ethical code. You're looking at different laws that might apply. You're going to key individuals for consultation and peers. You're figuring out what the consequences of your actions could be, and then you're deciding and documenting on what the actual action you're going to take is. And one thing that we tend to forget when we're out there in practice is that we're working with people, human beings, who can and should be involved in the process, because ethical dilemmas involve who? Our clients. So if I have a boundary issue, or if I have a client coming in for an intake and they walk in my door and I look at them and say, "Ooh, you are my kid's preschool teacher." They know that I'm a parent of a child that they're teaching. They're completely aware typically that there's some type of boundary issue present, or dual relationship or multiple relationship present. So working these situations out with the client, putting it all out in the forefront, really helps to establish a better connection with our clients, and foster that therapeutic relationship, because we're showing our clients that we trust and value their opinion in the process. Right? And we hope that we're doing that with our clients. Informed consent, we're going to be talking about informed consent in the discussion this week, and I wanted to highlight this this area in particular because in this class you will be doing videos. And while I'm not going to require that you have everybody sign, date, notarize informed consent for you, I think it is important for you, and this is why we're going to practice it in role plays too, but it's important for you to understand what goes into an informed consent, why we have informed consents and how to talk about informed consent, right? Some agencies will have developed their own informed consents for you. So you may or may not even have to worry about developing one on your own. I'm not sure what Dr. Blake does in his ethics class, assuming you're going to take him. In my ethics class, I have my students write an informed consent so that it's ready to go for practicum and internship if the site you're working for doesn't have one. I also have my practicum and internship students do that. So, so at some point you're probably going to be writing an informed consent. But there are a lot of things that go into an informed consent. It could be short, depending on where you're working and what that agency says is important to put in an informed consent. They can be really detailed anymore. I mean, I've seen informed consents that not only outline who the professional is, who the counselor is, their credentials, associations and organizations they're members of, licensure, certification information, where they can go to with complaints, information about billing and insurance, information about confidentiality, limits to confidentiality. I've seen informed consents that include information about social media, limits to using social media, or for counselors that are providing distance counseling services. There are, big pieces of that informed consent that talk about privacy and how even if you do the best that you can and you're using encrypted programs, hackers are hackers, right? So informed consents can be very robust. One thing to remember with informed consent, and especially when it comes to looking at the limits of confidentiality, the book talks about the types of limits to confidentiality that exist, right? And that's for us to know, and looking at limits to confidentiality and privileged communication, and what the difference is between that. And of course, it's important to include within informed consent that, if the client is harming themselves, thinking about harming others, or if they're being harmed by somebody else, or if a court mandates it, these are areas where confidentiality may need to be breached as part of our ethical obligation to keep our clients safe. You're going to learn a lot more about all of this within your ethics class, of course, but again, when you're in the role plays this semester, when you're working with each other, start practicing it. Start talking about that because clients are going to have questions. And if you hand them a packet with an informed consent that has all this information, if you do get a little bit too detailed, the questions might be a little bit more detailed. So it's important to include in informed consent what is necessary and important, but also not provide them with an abundance of information that they don't necessarily need to have. So practice talking about informed consent, how you broach the conversation with our client, because it's a little businessy, right? Somebody's coming in to ask us for our help, our assistance, and dealing with a life circumstance. And the first thing we do is we present to them a kind of legal looking document that says, like, this is who I am, and these are the things I can do for you, and this is what I can't do for you, and don't tell me about this if you don't want me to tell somebody else. And so it is kind of like the businessy aspect, and you're talking about insurance and payments and what happens if they cancel, or if they just don't show and you got to charge $25. So again, it takes a little bit of practice, a little finesse to figure out how to talk about informed consent when you're trying to establish a therapeutic relationship with somebody else, with a stranger, right, that first day. So why is it important that we talk about theory and ethics together? And I'm just going to kind of skip through the assessment and diagnosis process and all of that. There's a good amount of content in the slides, review them for sure. But I did want to highlight, okay, so if we are practicing from a theoretical orientation, we are we're essentially ethically obligated to be practicing from a theoretical orientation. That's what I'm trying to say here. So we stress evidence-based practices, yes, and that's the science of what we do. So, but there's an art to it as well. So counseling is both a science and an art, right? And so the evidence-based practices inform theory, right? They tell those theorists that what they have thought will happen, and using different approaches, their view of human nature and change is actually accurate in the population that they're looking at, that they can study techniques and see what the outcomes are. That's evidence-based practice, and that's very important. but then we've got people in front of us, right? And people are different and everybody is unique. And so we can't just be going by the book all the time exactly to a T, because people are people and we need to modify our techniques in ways that will engage the person sitting across from us. But at the heart of all of that is grounding ourselves in a theory and going back to that theoretical orientation in order to be providing competent services to our clients. And if we are not doing that, we are not practicing in an ethical way, okay? So everything that we're doing, and this is why when people say to me, I'm eclectic or I'm integrated. Okay, great. What does that mean though? What does that mean to you? And in what ways are you doing that? Because you shouldn't just be going and sitting in front of a client without having some idea of where you're going. How do you conceptualize a case that's being put in front of you? How do you look at setting goals and getting a client to reach those goals? What is in the in-between part? And that's not just sitting there being a friend to somebody or being a listening ear. Even if you're doing person-centered counseling, it's not. So, you know, all of this, if we fail to be doing that, if we fail to be grounding ourselves in a theoretical orientation and using techniques and skills that have that evidence-based practice background, then we're not acting in an ethical manner. We can potentially do harm to our clients if we do that, which is so important, in addition to getting complaints filed against us with an ethical board, right? So that's my little soapbox about how ethics and theory are intertwined, always have been, always will be. And with that, I'm going to leave you guys to the discussion board, talk a little bit about informed consent and working with clients. And hopefully this week has kind of got your mind geared towards the theory aspect of it, because next week is when we really hit the pavement hard, and we're going to get into psychoanalytic and Adlerian theories. I know that's a lot of content in 1 week, but those are older theoretical orientations. They're older theories, theories of psychoanalysis, and I feel like if you had a Psych 101 class, it's probably a review. Who hasn't heard about Freud? Okay, I'll leave you guys with that, and have a good week.